I used to believe that the worst kind of betrayal came from your enemies, until I learned that the people smiling beside you could quietly hand your life to strangers without you ever noticing. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of reflected neon, and I pulled my coat tighter as I hurried toward the subway entrance after another long shift at the Carter Community Foundation. At 26, my life wasn't glamorous. I spent my days organizing donation records, answering emails, and making sure struggling families received the help they deserved. It wasn't the career I had imagined when I graduated college, but it paid my rent on a tiny apartment in Queens and left enough money each month for coffee on Friday mornings, which felt like luxury these days. My phone buzzed with another message from my best friend asking if I was finally coming to dinner this weekend, and I smiled as I typed back that I wouldn't cancel this time. I never noticed the black sedan parked across the street. I never noticed the man sitting inside watching every person who crossed the intersection except me. I certainly never imagined that my ordinary Tuesday had already become the center of someone else's carefully calculated plan. The wind pushed harder as I reached the corner, and a cardboard box tumbled across the sidewalk, scattering children's books into the rain. An older man struggled to gather them while balancing a cane in one hand. Without thinking, I knelt beside him, ignoring the water soaking through my jeans as I picked up colorful picture books one after another. "Thank you," he said with a tired smile. "People don't usually stop anymore." "My mom taught me that kindness costs less than regret," I answered, handing him the last book. He chuckled softly before disappearing into the crowd, and I continued toward the subway with wet sleeves and cold hands, believing that would be the most memorable part of my evening. I was wrong. A few blocks later, I noticed someone standing beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. He was impossibly still while everyone else rushed through the storm. Tall. Dark overcoat. Black umbrella resting at his side instead of above his head as rain collected across his shoulders without seeming to bother him. For one brief moment, our eyes met. His expression didn't change. Calm. Careful. Almost familiar, though I knew we had never met. Then a little girl darted into the street after her bright red balloon, and before I could even react, he stepped forward, gently guiding her back onto the sidewalk just as traffic rolled through the intersection. He didn't say a word. He simply handed the balloon string back to the grateful child, nodded once to her mother, and disappeared into the rain before anyone could thank him. I watched him vanish between headlights and umbrellas, wondering why someone who carried himself like he owned the entire city seemed determined not to be noticed. What I couldn't possibly know was that his name was Adrian Romano. I couldn't know that powerful people had spent weeks discussing my name in rooms I would never be invited into. And I definitely couldn't know that while I believed I had simply witnessed a stranger helping a little girl on a rainy night, someone else had quietly slipped a small flash drive into the outside pocket of my canvas bag as I bent down to help the old man. By the time I boarded the downtown train, dripping rainwater onto the floor beside my shoes, I was thinking about leftovers in my refrigerator and whether I had enough energy to watch another episode of my favorite sitcom before bed. I had no idea that everything I believed about my ordinary life was already beginning to disappear. The subway rocked gently beneath the city, its windows reflecting tired faces instead of the skyline outside, and I leaned my head against the cool glass while raindrops raced each other across the surface. My stop was still 15 minutes away, giving me just enough time to answer a few work emails before pretending I had a life that did not revolve around spreadsheets and donor files. One message caught my attention immediately. It had been sent from my supervisor only 3 minutes earlier. "Emily, could you stop by my office first thing tomorrow morning? We have an unexpected delivery that needs to be logged before the auditors arrive." Nothing unusual about that. Our foundation received packages almost every day. Still, something about the timing made me uneasy, though I blamed it on exhaustion. Across town, Adrian Romano stood in front of a wall of glowing monitors inside an office overlooking the Hudson River. The city lights stretched beneath him like scattered stars, but his attention never left the security footage replaying on the largest screen. There I was, kneeling in the rain beside the elderly man, smiling as I handed back the children's books. Adrian watched another angle. A young courier brushed past me for less than 2 seconds, his hand slipping naturally against my canvas bag before disappearing into the crowd. The movement was so smooth that even slowing the footage frame by frame barely revealed it. One of Adrian's advisors broke the silence. The drive reached her. Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. She did not know, he finally said. No. And she was chosen because she would never suspect a thing. The advisor nodded once. She is invisible. Ordinary. Reliable. Nobody checks someone like her. Adrian looked away from the monitors for the first time. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only quiet disappointment. That is exactly why they chose her. He reached for the remote and turned off every screen except the one showing me stepping onto the subway. The room became almost silent except for the rain tapping against the enormous windows. Find everyone involved, he said calmly. Do not let them get close to her again. The advisor hesitated. Should we recover the drive tonight? Adrian shook his head. If we move now, they will know we found her. She is safer if they believe she is still exactly where they left her. Meanwhile, I finally reached Queens and climbed the familiar apartment stairs carrying a grocery bag with leftover soup and a loaf of bread. Mrs. Hernandez from apartment 3 opened her door just long enough to wave at me with a warm smile before reminding me not to forget the neighborhood fundraiser on Saturday. I promised I would bring dessert this year instead of store-bought cookies. Everything felt comfortingly ordinary. I unlocked my apartment, dropped my bag onto the kitchen counter, kicked off my damp shoes, and laughed at how soaked my socks had become. After changing into an oversized sweatshirt, I unpacked my groceries without noticing the tiny flash drive resting inside the outside pocket of my canvas bag only a few feet away. My attention drifted toward the living room window where rain continued to wash over the glass, and for reasons I could not explain, I found myself thinking about the quiet stranger beneath the bookstore awning. There had been something unusual about the way he looked at the world, as if he expected danger to appear around every corner but still chose kindness when nobody was watching. I told myself I would forget him by morning. Outside, a black sedan rolled slowly past my building before disappearing into the night. Adrian sat in the back seat, saying nothing as he looked up at the single apartment window where my kitchen light still glowed. He was not watching because he wanted to control my life. He was watching because somewhere in the city, people who had never met me were already waiting for me to unknowingly deliver something that could change all of theirs. Morning always smelled like fresh coffee and printer paper at the Carter Community Foundation, and as I stepped through the front doors with my canvas bag slung over one shoulder, I expected another ordinary Wednesday filled with donor records and endless spreadsheets. The lobby buzzed with volunteers carrying boxes of canned food while soft piano music drifted through hidden ceiling speakers. It was the kind of place where people smiled because they genuinely believed they were making the world a little better. I believed it too. That was probably why I never questioned anything. My supervisor, Linda Brooks, greeted me with an unusually relieved smile the moment she spotted me. Emily, perfect timing. We just received a secure package for one of our partners downtown. The courier canceled at the last minute, and since you were already planning to visit the education center this afternoon, would you mind dropping it off? I laughed. You know I cannot say no once you ask like that. She handed me a small padded envelope with a shipping label already attached. It felt surprisingly light, hardly heavier than a greeting card. I slipped it into my canvas bag beside my notebook without another thought. Linda thanked me twice before hurrying toward another meeting, and I settled into my desk convinced my biggest challenge today would be surviving another overflowing inbox. Several miles away, Adrian Romano stood in a quiet conference room surrounded by people who rarely looked surprised anymore. Yet every face around the table carried the same concern. One of his analysts placed a photograph beside a tablet displaying satellite maps of Midtown. They have moved to Phase 2, he said carefully. Adrian looked at the photograph. It showed the exact envelope now resting inside my bag. She accepted it, another advisor added. Adrian closed his eyes for only a second. Not because he was angry. because everything was unfolding exactly as he had expected. "Do they know she has the drive?" he asked. "No. They believe she is only carrying the package." Adrian walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the river. Boats moved peacefully through the water while the city awakened beneath gray clouds. "Good," he said quietly. "That means she still has time." His security chief stepped forward. "We can intercept her before lunch." Adrian slowly shook his head. "Not yet. Every hour increases the risk. Every move we make increases it even more." Silence settled across the room until Adrian finally turned back toward them. "If she suddenly disappears, every person behind this operation will know someone is protecting her. They will simply choose another innocent life. We end nothing by rushing." Back at the foundation, my day slipped by exactly the way every workday seemed to. I answered phone calls from generous retirees, helped a college student complete a scholarship application, and spent nearly an hour searching for a missing invoice that had accidentally been filed under the wrong month. By early afternoon, I grabbed my coat, my bag, and the delivery envelope before heading toward the subway. Rain had finally stopped, leaving the sidewalks shining beneath soft autumn sunlight. The city felt lighter than it had the night before. As I waited for the crossing signal, someone bumped gently into my shoulder before quickly apologizing and continuing down the block. I smiled politely and kept walking, never realizing he had been checking whether the envelope was still inside my bag. From across the street, hidden behind the windshield of another parked sedan, Adrian watched the entire exchange without moving. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as the man disappeared into the crowd. He already understood what the stranger had confirmed. The people using Emily Carter were no longer guessing where the package was. They were making sure she was still carrying it. The afternoon sun slipped between the glass towers of Midtown, painting long bands of golden light across the sidewalks as I climbed the subway stairs with my canvas bag resting comfortably against my shoulder. The education center was only 4 blocks away, close enough that I decided to walk instead of calling a cab. Children laughed in a nearby playground, office workers hurried past with coffee cups balanced in one hand, and street musicians filled the air with the sound of an old jazz standard that reminded me of weekends with my father before life became so busy. It felt impossible that anything dangerous could exist in a city that looked so beautifully ordinary. I checked the address on the envelope one more time before crossing the next intersection, wondering why I had never noticed the building before despite working in Manhattan for almost 4 years. Across the street, a black SUV rolled slowly with the flow of traffic. Adrian Romano sat quietly in the back seat, his eyes following every step I took. His security chief glanced at a tablet displaying several moving location markers. 3 separate teams, he said in a low voice. One arrived 20 minutes ago. Another is approaching from the west. The third has remained inside the destination building since this morning. Adrian studied the screen without speaking. Every marker represented someone waiting for a package they believed would arrive exactly on schedule. Do they know about us? He finally asked. No. They believe they are only watching her. Adrian looked through the window again, finding me just as I paused to help a young mother lift a stroller over a broken section of sidewalk. The woman thanked me warmly before continuing on her way, unaware that several pairs of eyes had quietly observed the simple act of kindness. Adrian almost smiled. She still stops for strangers, he murmured. His security chief looked confused. Does that matter? Adrian answered without taking his eyes off the sidewalk. It tells me they have not changed who she is. Not yet. I reached the address a few minutes later, surprised to find a renovated brick building with a cheerful sign welcoming local students to an after-school tutoring program. Children were leaving through the front entrance carrying backpacks almost as large as they were. Nothing about the place seemed unusual. A receptionist greeted me with an easy smile. Can I help you? I have a delivery for your director. She checked a clipboard before shaking her head politely. I am sorry. We are not expecting anything today. I blinked in confusion. The foundation asked me to bring this personally. There must be some mistake. She looked genuinely puzzled. Our director has been attending a conference in Boston since Monday. A cold feeling settled quietly in my stomach. Not fear exactly. More like the uncomfortable realization that something no longer made sense. I stepped outside and pulled out my phone to call Linda, but the call went directly to voicemail. I tried again. The same result. My email application refused to refresh even though the signal bars were full. I frowned, wondering if the network was having problems. Across the street, Adrian watched my expression change for the first time since I had left the foundation. She had finally noticed that the path beneath her feet was beginning to disappear. Before anyone inside the sedan could speak, Adrian's phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen, and the message contained only 6 words. She knows something is wrong now. Adrian slipped the phone back into his pocket and quietly opened the car door. For the first time since this began, watching from a distance was no longer enough. I stood on the sidewalk staring at my phone long enough for the screen to dim twice before I finally slipped it back into my pocket. Linda never ignored my calls. Not once in the 3 years we had worked together. Even during vacations she usually answered within minutes, always apologizing for being away from her desk. The silence felt wrong. I looked back toward the tutoring center where children were laughing as parents gathered them one by one. Everything around me looked perfectly normal, yet I could not shake the feeling that I had somehow walked into the wrong story. I reached into my canvas bag to check the envelope one more time, hoping I had simply mixed up the address. Instead, my fingers brushed against something hard that I did not recognize. Confused, I pulled out a tiny black flash drive. I frowned, turning it over in my hand. I had never seen it before. I searched every pocket of my bag, thinking perhaps it belonged to someone at the office, but there was no label, no company logo, nothing that explained why it had suddenly appeared among my notebook and pens. My heartbeat became just a little faster. Had someone accidentally dropped it into my bag? Had I picked it up without noticing? Across the street, Adrian Romano watched me discover the drive through the windshield of his car. His security chief exhaled quietly. She found it earlier than expected. Adrian never looked away. She was always going to find it. Do we move now? Adrian answered almost immediately. Not until she understands she cannot trust what she sees. Before another word could be spoken, one of his associates handed him a tablet containing newly recovered information. Adrian scanned the report, and for the first time that day a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. The delivery request had never originated from the foundation. Someone had duplicated Linda Brooks's email credentials, altered the office schedule, and inserted a fake assignment into Emily's workday without leaving an obvious trace. Every step had been designed to look ordinary because ordinary people rarely question ordinary instructions. Adrian quietly placed the tablet aside. She was selected months ago, he said. This did not begin yesterday. I looked around again, suddenly noticing details I had ignored before. The same man wearing a gray baseball cap had walked past the building twice within 10 minutes. A white delivery van remained parked across the street even though nobody loaded or unloaded anything. A woman talking on her phone glanced toward me just a little too often before continuing down the block. Maybe none of it meant anything. Maybe I was simply letting my imagination run wild. But my instincts, usually so quiet, refused to settle down. I started walking toward the nearest coffee shop, thinking I could sit inside, borrow the wireless internet, and send Linda an email from my laptop instead. The moment I reached the corner, someone stepped neatly into my path. It was the quiet man from the rainy night outside the bookstore. The same calm blue eyes. The same composed expression. He was even more striking in daylight, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit beneath a dark overcoat that somehow looked effortless instead of expensive. For a second neither of us spoke. The sounds of the city faded behind the steady rhythm of passing traffic. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the flash drive still resting in my hand before returning to my face. "Miss Carter," he said with a calm voice that carried quiet authority instead of urgency, If you trust the wrong person during the next 5 minutes, your life will never be ordinary again. My breath caught. I had never told him my name. My first instinct was to step back, and I did. The tiny flash drive tightened in my hand as every warning I had ever heard about strangers echoed through my mind. He knew my name. He knew exactly what I was holding. Nothing about that should have made me feel safe. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though my pulse was beginning to race. The man did not move any closer. He left nearly 6 feet of space between us, as if he understood that trust could not be demanded. "My name is Adrian Romano," he replied calmly. "You do not know me, but I know enough to tell you that the package you were asked to deliver was never supposed to reach that building." I searched his face for some sign that he was joking, but there was nothing playful in his expression. Only quiet certainty. "How do you know where I was going?" I asked. He looked past me for the briefest moment before answering. "Because the people who planned this expected you to arrive exactly 3 minutes ago." A chill ran through me despite the warm afternoon air. I turned instinctively, scanning the sidewalk behind me. The man in the gray baseball cap was gone. The white delivery van had disappeared. Even the woman who had seemed unusually interested in me was nowhere to be seen. It was as though the entire street had quietly reset itself while I had been focused on the conversation. "You have been watching me," I whispered. Adrian did not deny it. "Yes." "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because someone else has been watching you much longer." I felt my stomach tighten. "I do not understand any of this." "I know." His voice remained surprisingly gentle. "That is exactly why you are in danger." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny but because everything sounded impossible. 24 hours earlier my biggest concern had been finishing monthly reports before Friday. Now a complete stranger was telling me that people I had never met were somehow interested in my life. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding," I said, "then explain how my name, my office, and this flash drive are connected." Adrian looked at the drive in my hand before meeting my eyes again. "I cannot explain everything here." "Convenient." My words came out sharper than I intended. "You appear out of nowhere, know my name, know where I work, know what is in my bag, and expect me to believe you are trying to help me." For the first time, something almost like regret crossed his face. "No," he admitted quietly. "I expect you not to believe me." That answer caught me completely off guard. He continued before I could respond. "Trust is earned. You have no reason to trust me today. But before this day ends, someone you already trust will ask you for that flash drive. When it happens, do not give it to them." My thoughts stopped. "Someone I know?" "Yes." "Who?" He slowly shook his head. "If I tell you now, you will warn them without meaning to." I stared at him, trying to decide whether I was standing in front of the most convincing liar I had ever met or the only person telling me the truth. Before I could ask another question, my phone finally rang. Linda's name appeared across the screen. Relief washed over me instantly. "Emily," she said the moment I answered, sounding unusually anxious, "thank goodness. I have been trying to reach you. Do not leave that area. Someone from our office is already on the way to pick up the package and anything else you found in your bag. Just hand everything over when they arrive." I looked up from the phone. Adrian had not reacted with surprise. He had simply lowered his eyes for a single second, as though he had been expecting those exact words all along. The call ended before I could ask a single question, leaving me frozen on the sidewalk with my phone still pressed against my ear. For several long seconds, I simply stared at the dark screen as my own reflection looked back at me. Linda had sounded worried, almost desperate, but Adrian had predicted every word before she spoke them. That was impossible. Unless it was not. I slowly lowered the phone and looked at him again. He had not stepped any closer. He simply waited, allowing me to reach my own conclusions instead of forcing them upon me. "How did you know?" I asked quietly. Adrian glanced toward the busy intersection where hundreds of strangers continued moving through their ordinary afternoons. Because whoever planned this understands that people trust familiar voices more than unfamiliar faces. I tightened my grip on the flash drive. You are asking me to believe that someone inside my office is lying to me. I am asking you to question why an organization that has always protected people suddenly placed you in a situation nobody can explain. His words settled heavily inside my mind. I remembered the unusual email. The delivery that nobody expected. The tutoring center director who had never requested a package. The mysterious flash drive in my bag. Every event had seemed harmless by itself. Together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Before I could respond, a silver sedan pulled smoothly to the curb. The passenger door opened, and I immediately recognized Daniel Foster from the accounting department. Daniel was 30, friendly, dependable, and the kind of coworker who remembered everyone's birthday without needing reminders. He smiled the moment he saw me. Emily, he called warmly, Linda asked me to come get you. She has been worried sick. Relief almost swept away every doubt. Daniel was someone I had eaten lunch with dozens of times. He had helped me carry heavy file boxes, fixed my office printer, and once driven me home after a subway delay during a snowstorm. He was safe. Familiar. Normal. I instinctively took a step toward him before Adrian quietly spoke beside me. Do not hand him the drive. Daniel looked past me and finally noticed Adrian standing a few feet away. His smile faded almost imperceptibly. Everything all right? He asked, though his eyes never left Adrian. Who is this? I opened my mouth, but no answer came. I realized with growing embarrassment that I knew almost nothing about either man. One had shared an office with me for years. The other had appeared in my life less than 10 minutes ago. Yet somehow the stranger had explained more truth than anyone else had all day. Daniel laughed softly, trying to ease the tension. Emily, come on. Linda is waiting. We just need the delivery package and whatever else was mixed into your bag so we can straighten this whole mess out. My heartbeat quickened. He had said whatever else was mixed into your bag. I had never mentioned the flash drive during my phone call with Linda. Neither had she. I was suddenly certain of that. I replayed the conversation in my mind. She had asked for the package and anything else I found. She had never described it. Daniel should not have known there was another item unless someone had already told him exactly what to retrieve. I looked at Adrian. He remained completely silent, almost as though he wanted me to discover the answer on my own instead of borrowing his. Daniel extended his hand patiently. Emily, it is just a flash drive. You do not need to be frightened. The moment those words left his mouth, every remaining piece of my ordinary world quietly fell apart, because I had never told anyone that the mysterious object in my hand was a flash drive. I felt the air leave my lungs before I even realized I had stopped breathing. Daniel's hand remained stretched toward me, his friendly smile unchanged, but I was no longer looking at his face. I was replaying every word of my phone call with Linda over and over inside my head. She had never called it a flash drive. She had never described what I had found. She had only said, bring the package and anything else you found in your bag. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet Daniel had named it without hesitation. My fingers slowly closed around the tiny device until the edges pressed into my palm. How did you know? I asked quietly. Daniel blinked once. Know what? That it is a flash drive. His smile lingered for another second before fading into something much more careful. Linda mentioned it. No, I answered before he could continue. She did not. Silence settled between us, almost invisible beneath the constant sounds of Manhattan. A taxi horn echoed somewhere down the avenue. A cyclist rang a bell while weaving through traffic. Two tourists laughed as they unfolded a paper map near the corner. The whole city kept moving as though nothing had changed, but my world had tilted so completely that I no longer knew where solid ground was. Daniel lowered his hand and forced a small laugh. Emily, you are tired. You probably forgot part of the conversation. I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted him to be right. It would have been so much easier if stress had simply made me confused. But deep inside, I knew exactly what I had heard. Adrian remained beside me without interrupting. He did not accuse Daniel. He did not pressure me. His silence somehow carried more weight than any argument either of us could make. Daniel took one slow step forward. Please, he said gently. Linda is waiting. She is worried about you. Before I could answer, Adrian finally spoke. If that is true, ask him one question. Daniel's eyes shifted toward Adrian with quiet annoyance. This does not concern you. Adrian ignored him completely. Ask him where Linda is waiting. I looked back at Daniel. Where is she? His answer came almost instantly. At the office. Adrian shook his head once. Call the foundation. Confused, I opened the employee directory and dialed the main office number instead of Linda's extension. The receptionist answered after the second ring. Carter Community Foundation. How may I help you? Hi, this is Emily Carter. Is Linda available? There was a brief pause. I am sorry, Emily. Linda left the building just before noon for a fundraising luncheon in Brooklyn. She is expected back after 5. I thanked her automatically and ended the call with trembling fingers. Daniel had gone completely still. She is not at the office, I whispered. He did not respond. Instead, his phone vibrated softly inside his jacket. He glanced at the screen for less than a second before slipping it away without answering. It was such a small movement that I might have ignored it any other day. Today, every detail felt enormous. Adrian watched Daniel with calm, unreadable eyes. You have lost your opportunity, he said quietly. Daniel sighed, and the easygoing coworker I had known for 3 years seemed to disappear. His shoulders straightened. His smile vanished completely. When he spoke again, the warmth in his voice was gone, replaced by professional composure. Emily, he said, you were never supposed to ask questions. My heart sank, not because of fear, but because I realized the hardest betrayal is never discovering that a stranger has deceived you. It is discovering that someone you trusted had been wearing a mask long before you ever learned to recognize the face underneath. Daniel's words hung in the air long after he stopped speaking, and for the first time in my life I looked at someone I had trusted for years and realized I had never truly known him at all. My mind searched desperately for another explanation, another version of reality where this was some elaborate misunderstanding, but every answer led back to the same impossible truth. The man who had celebrated birthdays with our office, laughed over takeout lunches, and helped me carry donation boxes through winter snow had been hiding something from the beginning. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. Why me? I asked. Daniel studied me with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Because you were exactly the kind of person nobody would ever suspect. The sentence landed heavier than I expected. All my life I had believed being ordinary was a comfort. Invisible people were safe people. Apparently, I had been wrong. Adrian stepped forward just enough to place himself between Daniel and me without making the gesture feel threatening. His voice remained calm. You have your answer now. Leave. Daniel smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. You already know it is too late for that. Neither man raised his voice. Neither looked angry. Yet the quiet conversation carried a weight that made the busy street around us seem strangely distant. I looked from one to the other, feeling as though I had wandered into a conversation that had begun years before I ever existed. Daniel glanced at the flash drive still resting in my hand. Emily, you still have a choice. Give it to me, walk away, and tomorrow your life returns to normal. Before I could respond, Adrian spoke without taking his eyes off Daniel. If that were true, she would never have seen you today. Daniel's silence was answer enough. My heart sank another inch. Adrian slowly turned toward me. Emily, listen carefully. From this moment forward, every decision you make matters. Not because of what is inside that drive, but because of what people believe is inside it. I frowned. You mean you do not even know what is on it? Adrian answered honestly. No. That surprised me more than anything else he had said. Then why has everyone been chasing it? Because secrets become valuable long before anyone reads them. I stared down at the tiny piece of black plastic resting against my palm. It looked so ordinary. It could have contained family photos, tax documents, or an unfinished grocery list. Yet somehow it had quietly unraveled everything I thought I understood about my life. A cool breeze swept through the avenue, carrying the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. As I looked up again, I noticed something else for the first time. People were no longer simply walking past us. A man pretending to read a newspaper remained on the same bench without turning a page. A woman with shopping bags had stopped beside a store window for nearly 5 minutes without once looking at the display. A bicyclist circled the block twice before slowing near the intersection again. They did not appear connected, but after everything that had happened, coincidence no longer felt believable. Adrian followed my gaze without turning his head. You finally see them. I nodded almost imperceptibly. How many? Enough. My pulse quickened. What do we do now? Adrian looked directly into my eyes, and for the first time since we met, I saw something beyond confidence and control. I saw concern. Genuine concern. We stop letting other people decide where you go next. Before I could answer, a city bus pulled between us and the opposite side of the street. When it rolled away a few seconds later, Daniel was gone, leaving behind nothing except the unsettling certainty that he had not disappeared because he was finished. He had disappeared because someone else had just entered the game. I had always believed freedom meant making my own choices, but standing on that crowded Manhattan sidewalk, I realized that every direction I could take had already been anticipated by someone else. I watched the place where Daniel had disappeared until the last wave of commuters swallowed the corner completely. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the silence that follows a question nobody wants to answer. Adrian looked toward the line of buildings surrounding the intersection, his attention moving from one rooftop to another before returning to me. We need to leave, he said quietly. Go where? I asked. Somewhere they are not expecting. I almost laughed. You keep saying they, but you never tell me who they are. He met my eyes without hesitation. Because names would only distract you from what matters right now. You already know enough to understand that the people involved have spent months planning around your habits. I thought about my morning coffee shop, my subway route, my office desk by the window, even the grocery store where the cashier always remembered my favorite tea. How many ordinary moments had never truly been private? The idea made my chest feel unexpectedly heavy. Adrian noticed the change in my expression. This was never your fault, he said. You were chosen because you lived a predictable, honest life. Predictable people are easier to move without them realizing it. We started walking together, not quickly, not suspiciously, just two strangers blending into the afternoon crowd. He deliberately matched my pace instead of asking me to match his. Every few steps I caught him scanning reflections in store windows instead of looking directly behind us. It was subtle enough that most people would never notice, but now I understood he was watching everything. Have you always lived like this? I asked. A faint smile appeared for less than a second. Long enough that I stopped counting. It sounds exhausting. It is. That single word carried more honesty than any long explanation could have. We entered a small neighborhood cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The warm scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee wrapped around us as the afternoon noise faded behind the closing door. College students worked on laptops near the windows while an older couple quietly shared pie in the corner. Nothing about the place suggested secrets or danger. Adrian selected a table near the back where he could see both entrances without making it obvious. I noticed the habit immediately. You chose this table on purpose. He nodded once. I choose every table on purpose. The waitress approached with an easy smile, and for the first time since meeting him, I watched Adrian become almost completely ordinary. He thanked her politely, ordered black coffee, and waited until she walked away before speaking again. Emily, I need you to answer one question honestly. I nodded. Has anyone at the foundation ever asked unusual questions about your schedule, your family, or where you spend your weekends? At first I wanted to say no. Then small memories began quietly surfacing. Linda asking whether I still visited my parents' graves every second Sunday. Daniel offering to organize employee emergency contact forms even though human resources normally handled them. Another coworker casually asking which subway station I preferred after work because she was considering moving nearby. At the time, every conversation had felt harmless. Now they fit together like pieces of a picture I had never realized was being painted. I slowly looked back at Adrian. I thought they were just being friendly. He lowered his eyes briefly, almost as though he had hoped I would never have to reach that conclusion. Before either of us could speak again, the waitress returned carrying 2 coffees instead of 1. She carefully placed both cups on the table, smiled politely, and quietly slipped a folded paper napkin beside Adrian's hand before walking away without another word. Adrian unfolded it beneath the table where only he could see the message. His expression did not change, but when he looked back at me, his voice became even calmer than before. We have less time than I thought. They know you are with me now. My hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup, but I could no longer feel its heat. The quiet cafe that had seemed so peaceful only moments earlier suddenly felt different, not because anything had visibly changed, but because I had finally begun seeing the world through Adrian's eyes. Every customer became another possibility. Every reflection in the front window became another question. I watched the waitress refill an elderly couple's coffee with an easy smile, wondering whether kindness itself could still be trusted. Adrian folded the small paper napkin into his jacket pocket without allowing anyone else to notice. What did it say? I asked. He answered without hesitation. Someone inside my organization has been feeding information to the same people who have been following you. I stared at him. Your people too? He nodded once. Trust breaks quietly. That is why betrayal is so difficult to recognize until it has already happened. The realization settled over me with unexpected sadness. Until now, I had imagined Adrian as someone who controlled every situation. Hearing that even he could be deceived somehow made him seem less distant and more human. Then neither of us knows who to trust anymore, I whispered. Not completely, he replied. But uncertainty does not mean we stop choosing carefully. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated across the table. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It contained only one sentence. Do not trust Adrian Romano. He needs the drive more than anyone. I looked up immediately. Adrian had not reached for my phone. He simply watched my expression change. They contacted you, he said. It was not a question. I slowly turned the screen toward him. He read the message, then leaned back in his chair without the slightest hint of surprise. I wondered how long it would take. You expected this? Yes. Why? Because the easiest way to separate two people is to convince each of them that the other is lying. His calmness frustrated me. Then tell me something honest. My voice came out louder than I intended, causing a few nearby customers to glance toward our table before returning to their conversations. I lowered my voice again. Who are you really? Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Finally he answered. The newspapers would call me a businessman. Other people would use different words. None of those descriptions matter today. They matter to me. He held my gaze. Years ago I inherited responsibilities I never asked for. Since then I have spent more time preventing damage than creating it. His answer was careful, but it did not feel dishonest. It felt incomplete. And this flash drive? I asked. Why would people think you want it? Adrian looked toward the rain beginning to gather outside the cafe windows. Because they assume everyone measures value the same way they do. Do you? He shook his head. If I wanted that drive, I would have taken it the first time I saw you. I thought back to the rainy night outside the bookstore. He had been close enough. He could have reached into my bag without my ever noticing, just as someone else had slipped the drive inside. But he had not. That single realization quietly dismantled another piece of the fear I had built around him. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not a message. It was a photograph. I opened it with trembling fingers. It showed my apartment building taken only minutes earlier. Mrs. Hernandez stood outside watering the small flowers she always cared for near the entrance. There was no caption beneath the image. No threat. No explanation. Just the unmistakable message that someone knew exactly where home was. My chest tightened. They know where I live. Adrian's expression remained composed, but something in his eyes hardened with quiet resolve. No, he said softly. They wanted you to know they know where you live. There is a difference. And from this moment forward, you are not going back there until we understand who has been moving every piece on this board. The photograph stayed on my phone long after the screen should have gone dark, and I could not stop staring at Mrs. Hernandez standing beside her flowers as though it were just another ordinary afternoon. She had no idea someone had turned my home into a message. That frightened me more than anything else that had happened. This was no longer only about me. It was about every innocent person whose life brushed against mine without ever asking to become part of this story. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked across the table at Adrian. I cannot let anyone else get pulled into this. He nodded slowly, as though he had expected those exact words. That is why you cannot go home. I lowered my eyes to the untouched coffee in front of me. Yesterday I thought I had a simple life. A faint smile crossed his face, though there was sadness behind it. You still do. I looked at him in disbelief. Nothing about this is simple. Your heart is. He said it so quietly that I almost missed it. That is the one thing they have never been able to manipulate. I did not know how to answer. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Most people called me dependable or organized or quiet. Adrian had somehow seen something deeper after knowing me for less than a day. Outside the cafe, the rain finally began again, soft drops tapping against the windows as pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. For a few peaceful seconds neither of us spoke. Then Adrian reached inside his jacket and carefully placed the folded napkin from earlier on the table. You asked me who I trust, he said. This is the answer. I unfolded it carefully. Instead of a message, there were only 3 handwritten names. The first had already been crossed out. Who are they? I asked. The only 3 people I believed would never betray me. My eyes drifted to the crossed-out name. And now? Now there are 2 left. His voice never changed, but I could hear the weight behind it. Trust, I realized, was not something Adrian gave easily. Yet every betrayal seemed to cost him more than anyone else could see. My phone vibrated once again. This time the notification came from my bank. Someone had attempted to reset my online account password. Seconds later another alert appeared from my email provider reporting a login attempt from a different location. My hands trembled as more notifications arrived. My apartment building. My work account. My social media. Every ordinary piece of my life was being touched by invisible hands. They are trying to become me, I whispered. Adrian looked at the screen for only a moment before calmly taking a small notebook from inside his coat. Write down every password you remember changing during the past year. I looked at him in confusion. Why? Because people rarely steal information first. They study habits. I slowly began writing, surprised by how many passwords were built around birthdays, favorite books, and places I had loved as a child. Adrian watched quietly until I stopped. "Do you see it?" I frowned. Then it hit me. Every answer came from stories I had shared at work during birthday lunches, charity dinners, and casual conversations over coffee. I had handed strangers pieces of my life, one harmless memory at a time. Tears gathered in my eyes, not from fear but from disappointment in myself. I told them everything. Adrian gently slid the notebook closed. "No," he corrected. "You shared your life with people you believed had earned your trust. That is not weakness, Emily. That is what decent people do." Before I could answer, the cafe door opened and an elderly man stepped inside, shaking rain from his umbrella. I recognized him instantly. He was the same man whose scattered children's books I had picked up on that rainy evening when all of this began. He looked directly at Adrian first, then at me, and with a quiet smile that somehow carried years of hidden meaning, he said, "It took longer than we hoped, Adrian, but she finally knows she was never the real target." The old man's words settled over the table with a quiet certainty that made every sound inside the cafe seem impossibly distant. I stared at him, searching his face for the answer that had been hiding from me since the rainstorm outside the bookstore. "I was never the real target?" I repeated. He nodded gently before taking the empty chair beside us. "No, Emily. You were the path, not the destination." My eyes immediately turned toward Adrian. For the first time since we had met, he did not look away. There were no more half answers left between us. "The drive was never the reason they chose you," he said. "It was only the excuse." I frowned. "Then what did they want?" Adrian drew a slow breath. "Me." The single word explained everything and yet created 100 new questions. The old man smiled sadly. "People who cannot control a man will often search for someone whose kindness he cannot ignore." I looked from one face to the other, slowly remembering every impossible coincidence. The bookstore. The little girl. The tutoring center. Daniel. Linda's altered email. Even the photograph of my apartment. None of it had been random. Adrian had not entered my life because I carried a flash drive. I had been carrying the flash drive because someone wanted Adrian to enter my life. "But why would you risk any of this?" I asked him. His answer came without hesitation. "Because the first evening I saw you kneeling in the rain to help a stranger, I realized they had chosen someone who would never understand the game they were forcing her into." His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet conviction. "You never asked for any of this. I could not allow you to face it alone." I felt tears gathering again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization that throughout the worst day of my life, the only person who had never asked me for anything was the one everyone had warned me about. Daniel wanted the drive. Anonymous messages wanted my trust. Hidden strangers wanted my routines, my passwords, my future. Adrian wanted only one thing. For me to remain myself. The old man stood and gently placed one of the children's books onto the table. It was the same worn copy I had picked up from the wet sidewalk 2 days earlier. Inside the front cover was a handwritten sentence. "Kindness always reveals itself before character does." I looked up in surprise. "You planned that?" The old man chuckled softly. "No. I dropped the books on purpose. Everything after that belonged entirely to you." Adrian looked at me with quiet respect. "Nobody instructed you to stop. Nobody rewarded you for helping. You simply chose compassion when you believed nobody was watching." Outside, the rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, filling the cafe windows with warm afternoon light that reflected across the table between us. It felt strangely symbolic, as though the city itself had taken a long breath. I slipped the flash drive onto the table and pushed it gently toward Adrian. He looked at it for a moment before sliding it back to me. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs to the person whose life was turned upside down because of it." I blinked in surprise. "You do not even want to know what is inside?" A faint smile appeared on his face. Whatever is stored on that drive can be replaced. The person sitting across from me cannot. For the first time since everything began, I believed him completely. I had entered that week believing the strongest people were those who controlled everyone around them. I left it understanding something far greater. Real strength is not measured by the lives you can command. It is measured by the innocent life you refuse to sacrifice, even when the entire world tells you it would be easier to let go.